Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Is that okay? Is that better? Doesn't seem to be very loud, does it? Don't know. Can people hear me towards the other end? Yeah, okay. It didn't sound very loud to me, but okay, thank you very much for coming this afternoon, everybody. My name's Councillor Katie Dye, and I am chairing this meeting of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. Sorry? It is, well, it said push to talk, so should be. We'll see what happens as it goes round, but we'll start with introductions. So I'm going to ask members of the committee to introduce themselves first, and can I remind you to switch your microphone on and then off again when you're done. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Andy Rowntree from Kirkstall.
Good afternoon, Councillor Bromley for Horsforth and Rawdon.
Hi, Councillor Adele Ray from Bramley and Stanningley.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carlin Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Penny Stables from Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Rick Downs, Otley Eden Ward.
Thank you, everybody. And now we'll go around, and officers and colleagues who are joining us can also do introductions. So shall we start there, please?
Good afternoon, Rachel Waterhouse, Policy Officer at Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Good afternoon, everybody. Stacey Whitehead of Plays and Consents and the Mass Transit Programme at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Good afternoon. Toby Russell, Clerk to the committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Polly Kirk, Chief Officer, Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for being here this afternoon. So we're going to go through the first few items via Toby. So do you want to run us through items 1 to, I think it's 5, Toby?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So agenda item number 1 is appeals. So we have no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Item number 2 is exempt information. We have no exempt items on today's agenda. Item number 3 is late items, and we have no formal late items today. Item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interests? No, thank you. And item number 5 is apologies for absence. So we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Newton and Councillor Tudor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Toby. And before we move on, do you want to introduce yourselves, since you've just come in?
Mohammed Rafiq, Chapel Alton Ward, and Exec Board Member for Environment, Energy, Climate and Green Spaces. I think I've said it the other way around.
Apologies, Chair. Councillor Mohammed Shazad for the Moortown Ward.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to start with minutes of previous meetings, and we've got 3 sets of minutes to approve because we have the last formal meeting and then we've got the online meetings. So I'm going to go through them in pages. Well, I'm going to, where there's 1 page, I'm going to do it page at a time. But then when there are 2, I'm going to do them together, and then it can be a little bit quicker. So we'll start with page 5. So if you have any comments, matters arising, matters of correction, please let me know. Page 6 and 7. Pages 8 and 9. Pages 10 and 11. And 12 and 13. Okay, so that's for the meeting on the 16th of December, so we can all agree those as a true record. So the next ones are the 20th of January, page 15, pages 16 and 17, pages 18 and 19, 20 and 21, and 22 and 23. Okay, so finally, the meeting on the 24th of February. So page 25, 26 and 27. And just to point out from me on page 26 that I did pass on the contact details for the Climate Ambassadors programme to everybody. So hopefully you've managed to share that with schools in your wards. And pages 28 and 29, 30 and 31, and 32 and 33. Okay, thank you. So that's those 3 sets of minutes approved, and we're moving on to item 7. So item 7 is our open forum slot where people are welcome to come and address the committee, and I'm very, very pleased to let you know that we've got Grimesdyke School with us today, so we wait for a minute for them to come and get themselves in position. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy school day to come and talk to us. It's really good to see you all here. I don't know if anybody's given you any instructions on how to use the microphone, but there should be a button in front of you where it says push to talk. And if you push that, I'll give you a little practice at it. When I'll stop talking and you can have a little practice at pushing the button, and it should light your microphone up red. So do you want to do that? And then if you push it again, it turns off, and that's it. That's super. That's how you work it. So when we're ready for you to talk, you can press the button, and then when you finish saying what you need to say, you can press it again. So I think we're waiting for a presentation. Is that right? That's not unusual. That looks good. I think we can see you. Fabulous. So we can see your presentation. I think we've got a microphone on, have we? Does it need muting? Is that just me?
Oh, this on.
Is that better? No. Is that better? Yeah, that looks really good. So thank you very much for coming to see us. If you'd like to introduce yourselves first, that would be lovely, so we know who's here. So you could press your button, introduce yourself, and then move on to the next person. And then as soon as you're ready, you can move straight into your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. My name's Louise Hill, and I'm the head teacher of Grimesdyke Primary School.
Good afternoon, my name is Anne-Marie Grewell, I'm in Year 5. Good afternoon, I'm Lily Smart from Year 5. Good afternoon, I'm Emery from Year 5. Good afternoon, I'm Anu Warren from Year 5.
Okay, good afternoon. You should be able to see a picture of our school grounds there. We are very lucky. We are located in East Leeds, and these are our school grounds. They are vast. We know we're very lucky, but we are very conscious that because we've got this green space, that we have to make it work for the children, and we have to make it work for the nature that we share it with. So we, for the last nearly 5 years, have been on a journey of rewilding our school grounds. Make it go on. There we go. So there's a few different things that we do at Grimesdyke, and one of them is to rewild our school grounds, and with it we rewild our children alongside that as well. I've told them to keep clean today, but they're usually very muddy when they come in from the school grounds because we allow them to have access to the whole thing. We leave huge sections of the grass to grow into meadows. We started with a small patch a few years ago and gradually have left more and more and more. And that's because we're very aware that meadows lock in up to 3 tonnes of carbon per year per hectare, which is double the amount that woodlands can do. We've got a lot of grass and we need to make that work. We teach the children about nature, but we also teach them in nature. And because of that, they're really, really knowledgeable about the world around them. They can give some adults a run for their money on their nature knowledge. We prioritise play. We give children year-round access to our school grounds. It doesn't matter what weather it is, what season it is. They have their wellies on and they are out there all year round. We plan with them. They decide on the improvements. We teach them about leaving a legacy for the other children that are going to be attending the school. That might be the next year group, but it is also their children and their grandchildren, which is why tree planting is key to that. We encourage them to observe. We look at changing in seasons, growth of new trees. We look really closely at areas that lack life or have little shade, because we are very aware that we have to provide shade, and we seek to improve our school grounds for people and nature. We very closely follow the Education Nature Park resource, which is a national resource. We're very well known for that, and we map our school grounds and involve the children in real scientific research. But we link all of this back to climate change and how we're making a positive impact as individuals, but also as a group. And we deal with all this in a really, really positive way, that we have to combat climate anxiety of children, climate anxiety of adults, but dealing with it in what we can do to make a real big difference. And you can see there's some pictures there of children getting really hands-on with some power tools. Right, I'm going to hand over to the important people now.
We put a trail cam out and captured foxes on it. And for Pancake Day, we cook our own pancakes on a fire we have made ourselves. We are trusted to do this. We have a club called Science in Nature, where we learn about climate change and how to help. Mohammed, the children's mayor, came to our school to find out what we do about climate change. No matter what the weather is, we plant at least 500 trees per year to combat climate change. We have many other plants and trees in our school grounds, as well as a pond. We want other schools to learn from us. When it is snowy, we get to bring sledges and have fun. We have fascinating animals who share our school grounds, like foxes and badgers. We plant seeds every year for next year's tree planting. We learn about climate change and how to improve it for ourselves. We would love other schools to visit us and learn what they can do to combat climate change in their school grounds.
So there you go. It's an open invite for the children, for any school, to come and visit our school grounds, to see what we do and to see what they could do. Even in a really, really small space, you can make a massive difference. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fabulous. Thank you so much for coming and sharing the information about your fabulous. Absolute pleasure to meet you, and it is a truly, truly wonderful place. I've been there, and I strongly advise anybody who's sitting here around this committee table who has not, to please take you up on the offer and go and visit, because it's a truly magical place. And also the offer of other schools. So if you've got any other schools in your ward that you're working with, please get in touch with Grimesdyke, because they would love to host you and share their resources and teach you all the things that they've learned. So thank you so much for coming. Wow, that was fabulous. It's almost a shame to move on. But move on we must. And we're going now to item 8. So item 8 is our director slot, where we invite directors to come and share their progress with the committee, and we can ask them what questions we'd like in terms of moving on. So we'll give them a minute to get around the table. And none of them working, though yours is.
Yes, Councillor Dye. 3 of us are working, 2 of us aren't. But
Okay.
I am going to start, so I don't know whether or not you just want me...
Let's just see if we can get going first. It'll probably be easier, won't it? Now I'm not even pressing my button. Thank you very much for coming along. Would you like to do a row of introductions first, and then you're welcome just to start your presentation? Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Angela Barnacle. I am the Director of City Development, and I'll pass to my colleagues this way. So, Mark.
Afternoon, Mark Mills, Interim Chief Officer for Asset Management and Regeneration.
Afternoon, Fiona Bolam, Interim Chief Officer for Economy and Skills.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chief Officer Gary Bartlett, Chief Officer Highways and Transportation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Feeney, the Chief Planning Officer.
So thank you, everybody. I'm going to give us a quick overview, but you'll see that I've brought colleagues with me today because I'm acutely aware and struggling to follow in such a good session before us, where I think the closing statement was about in a small space you can make a very big difference. Well, obviously Leeds is a very big place, so let's hope that we're making a very big difference. So I'm aware that the last time the Director of City Development, which was Martin Farrington, came to SEAC was November 2023. And I'm really conscious that a lot of the schemes that we deliver in city development have a long gestation period and then a long time to delivery. So there will be some overlap between what Martin has updated on and what we're going to update on. And I'm also conscious that Fiona and Gillian were here at SEAC last month talking about the future talent plan and green jobs, etc. So we'll perhaps cover that quite quickly. So if I move forward to our first slide and start with economy and skills, you'll see that climate change has absolutely ran through the Leeds Inclusive Growth Strategy, which is now in its second phase of strategy and runs up to 2030. And it's really embedded in our innovation narrative, where it talks about being a city that wanted to drive innovation
on not just healthier, but on a greener outcomes as well. So it's embedded in all the work that Fiona delivers on, including obviously the talent planning, including green jobs. We've also updated on some of the more recent initiatives that partners in the city have been working on. So the city's Sustainable Green Finance Initiative is actually based at Nexus Leeds, being part of the University of Leeds, which works with some of their industry outstanding professors such as Professor Ian Clacker in terms of how are we getting really good green finance initiatives throughout the city and building upon that wealth of finance professional services that we've got here in Leeds. Certainly now that we're home of the National Wealth Fund, certainly with the FCA's arrival and certainly with the Bank of England. Can I move on to the next slide? Sorry, Grace. Thank you. And then moving through into culture, I know when Martin came last time and he talked about SAIL, and SAIL is about the sustainable innovation in our culture sector. And at that point, we had about 300 members. We've now got 800 members, and SAIL has really taken all of its learning that it had through Leeds 2023 and is now employed by Bradford 2025, their year of culture this year, about driving sustainability through their culture programme too. So that's a real big success story of the culture sector in Leeds and actually being able to scale up, etc. And then you will have seen more recently in the BBC covered what we've called the Dead Plants Society project. So this is one of our arts and culture partners, Space 2, who are based out in East Leeds, who are working with Leeds Museum and Galleries, where we have opened up our collections of plants, etc., to trace carbon capture right through back the last 250 years to see how that part of the city has really changed in terms of its climate. So we're really looking forward to some of the results that are coming through there as well. And then if I move on to operations and active leads, you'll note, and Polly will be all too familiar with the work that we've been doing throughout our estates of our leisure centres. So where we've been working to get more energy efficiency within our buildings, but also work with new sources of heating, such as air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. And we've been able to capture or reduce more than 10 tonnes of carbon emissions just through more energy efficient technology. And I know that team are really working hard on being trained in energy efficiency. So how do we use our building management systems to their best of the capabilities to make sure that things like the pool are heated, but the energy is resourced and recycled. And then just some of the initiatives that are running through our markets as well. So our market colleagues have been working a lot on food waste in the markets. So now they've been able to make sure that none of our food waste from the markets is going into waste. It's actually collected for animal feed. And they've been working on items such as sustainable plastic sourcing within the broader markets and really trying to drive the efficiencies through their trader programme as well. And then, yes, again, here on the bottom, it talks about a general move throughout all of our portfolio to move towards LED lighting, and not just at Kirkgate Market, but throughout the whole portfolio. Thanks, Grace. And then moving on to planning, and I'm sure David is going to can cover this in quite some detail, but through our local plan update, we are really focusing on net zero, the renewable energy and the flood management, certainly if we want to keep growing the city in a much more sustainable way. David, in your update, you can cover some of those key policies, can't you? So they're quite detailed, so I'll cover them at that point. And then, Grace, if we move through into asset management. So our asset management colleagues, which is a service that Mark now leads, have been working really hard through our own portfolio and also working with Polly's team about identifying a number of sites for sustainable tree planting. We've also been working through our portfolio to transition towards more energy efficient methods, and we've been working with a number of our tenants too. So I'm really pleased here on the bottom of the slide, the First Direct Bank Arena, which is a building which we own but is leased out to ASM Global, who operate the arena. were the only arena in the UK last year to be awarded the Greener Arena for 2024. And that looks at all aspects of their production. So anything from how they harvest their rainwater and feed their toilet systems, right through to how they're working with their food suppliers, how they weigh all their waste at the end of the evening, and then send that off again to be packaged for animal feed where that's appropriate too. So that was a real big success story for where we've worked with one of our tenants as well. And then if I keep going, Grace. And then thinking about council housing growth. We are partway through the delivery of the new build programme here. So when Martin came to talk to you, he would have said 60% of what we've delivered to date uses low energy carbon technology. I'm really pleased to say that 100% of all of our construction sites now use this technology too. So everything that, as we've learned throughout the programme, everything that we've managed to get on site has been learning from the scheme before. And I know a few of you around the room have had the pleasure of going to Gascoigne House and the scheme that we brought forward at Throstle Rec in Middleton, which has its own mini district energy supply around that whole development. Which is modelled and regenerated so that none of the houses that surround the extra care facility at Gascoigne House have any gas boilers. So we've really updated that technology along with using solar technology, etc. And the real big win for our tenants is now the cost of of running a home. So instead of paying it on, heating bills, etc., colleagues and tenants have got much more disposable income. And then if I move forward onto regeneration, I'm really pleased that the second phase of a park will be coming on stream quite soon. So you'll see that we delivered the Air Park phase 1 around the bridge and with the Yinki Shonaberi sculpture in terms of hibiscus rising. But the main phase of the park will be coming into public use later on this spring and summer, where we've had 500 trees planted, as well as just the cooling effects that having a city centre park really bring. But that will really come for that livability of the city centre later this summer. And late last year, Fastint, who are the developer for Air Park, also got planning permission for a 100% connected electric car park. So every car park within their multi-storey car park that services the whole site has an electric charging facility, along with significant cycle storage and significant kind of the added extras that people need to make cycling a real usable alternative, such as cycle washing, cycle repair, decent lockers and access to showering facilities. So that's a real progressive scheme right at the heart. And then I just wanted to touch on some of the schemes that we're also working on that don't always automatically talk about carbon capture or the climate emergency, and that's in our heritage estate. So the work that we're doing on Temple Mill, the work that we've been doing on Lower Kergate, the work that we're doing with the old medical school on the Teaching Hospitals campus just around the corner from here, about really safeguarding that heritage in buildings, and in doing so safeguarding that carbon that's already captured. And then finally on this slide, the work that we are doing through the Morley Town deal, and the significant connectivity work that we're doing right from the heart of Morley right through into the White Rose Centre, the office park and beyond, and this greenway to make it a real connected place, but through more active and more sustainable travel measures. And then in highways and transportation. I think it was only July that you had Jonathan Moxton through to come and talk to you about the flood alleviation scheme, and I'm really pleased that a scheme that's been in fruition for about a decade now has finished its construction phase, and this year is becoming operationally ready. I won't dwell on that too much because I know it's had its own discussion here, but also it's a really important point because not does it just protect the city from flooding, which is our biggest risk in terms of climate as a city, but the whole carbon that was expanded just to deliver that scheme is equivalent to even if we just had to do that clean up once. So we know it was the right thing to do in terms of protecting our communities and our businesses and our city, but actually in how it's been delivered has been very purposeful in making sure that we're delivering the most progressive technology. And then more broadly with some thank you, Grace has gone back. And then just to highlight a couple of the other sustainable travel measures that we're working on. It will be over the course of the next probably 10 months now that we will conclude our work on Leeds train station. And that whole work was about making sure that the station could continue to function as passenger numbers grew. And we know that last year we had 30,000 more passengers going through the station than we did in 2019. So we're already back to pre-COVID levels. And we know that 70% of people who arrive at Leeds station do not come from an LS postcode. So in terms of having a real functioning, sustainable travel network, the city station have been at the heart of that is critical. And this first phase was always about making sure that our pedestrians were safe and had the room to move as they were coming and going from the train station. And with that, we are delivering a significant uplift in cycle provision store, because what we really want to be able to do is people to cycle to their nearest heavy rail station and then be able to cycle onwards or use our own barrel bikes when people get into the city. So that will be a real big win. And we won't, hopefully, stop developing the station, because we're already in very advanced talks with Network Rail and DfT for the next phase of development, which is about making sure that the platforms and the capacity within the station that can take trains is really coming through as well. So I will pause there because I'm conscious that we're a very varied department, and I've got a lot of colleagues here with us that we can answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Before we open up to questions, does anybody else around want to make any comments? No. Okay, we'll go straight into questions then. So can you indicate if you'd like to ask a question, please? We'll start with Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for the presentation, Angela. What I'd like to ask is, with reference to some of the new technologies that you touched on, particularly around heating, the district heating, heat pumps, solar. Just wondering if you could tell us a bit about how we're learning from each implementation and how we might be improving the way we do things next time around. I'm very conscious that with new technologies, there's very often a lot of teething troubles, and clearly to sort of make the most of the opportunities we've got, we need to be sort of constantly focused on doing better and doing smarter. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to come in on that one?
I'm going to let Mark come in on that one, but also I'm really conscious that Polly knows more about this than probably anyone around the room as well. So,
okay, so yes, Polly probably knows a lot more about this than I do, but yes, I think there is constant learning, there's constant evolution of technology as well, and I think, you know, in terms of our own estate of properties, obviously there's been quite a lot of investment made, as Angela's already alluded to. I think there's probably been scepticism in some parts around whether that will be successful, and I think there is a user journey that is required, and I think it's human nature, isn't it, to go and fiddle with things, and that can sometimes undermine the technology that's gone in. I think there's examples of that. So there's a learning journey for the user and the building occupiers, as well as from an installation perspective. I think in terms of the Council Housing Growth Programme, as was said in the presentation, we've moved a considerable way, and now all the properties that are coming forward have renewable heat sources installed. And I think, again, that's been as a result of the advancement of technology, but also the way in which the industry has moved to be able to implement that technology, learning what works, what doesn't work, and being able to maximise its rollout in the most effective way. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
That's very helpful, thanks. Yes, I mean, you mentioned sort of users and tendency to fiddle. I think I know what you mean there. I mean, is that something that we can arm ourselves against going forward to make it sort of less likely the next time round and be better prepared for it? I mean, as you say, it is as a feature of human nature, isn't it?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's that handover journey. When technology, for example, a heat pump, for instance, is put into a service-led property, it's about how that's handed over to those building users so that they know what they should touch and what they shouldn't touch, how the system will perform. And obviously some of that technology operates very differently to how a traditional gas boiler would. So therefore, you know, it's about managing expectations about what that means for users.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring Polly in as well.
Just to say, one of the big challenges we've had with the decarbonisation is a lot of the funding was focused on heating replacement and not the secondary works that are needed. And so with some of our buildings, we've then had to follow behind and do those secondary works. So as we've gone through the schemes, we've got better at planning those in and realising kind of the changes you need to make to buildings to make things work effectively. So I think some of the sort of, especially like the leisure centres, as they've rolled out further down the road, they've hit the ground much more effectively, and that's part of our lessons learning as we've gone through that, and also the working with LBS in terms of making sure that they're on board from day one and the training and all of that's in place. All of that has got better as we've gone through, but we've had the sort of same team doing all that focused delivery, so they've learned as well as they've gone along. So I think we have, and I think the point Mark made was really valid about building users, and like even with the Leeds pipe district heating, when we first launched it, we didn't put enough in for tenant support, and so now we have dedicated tenant support to make sure, because of the higher turnover in some of those properties, to make sure that people are guided through that and that they don't have challenges. So it's just having all that wraparound and making sure you've got the right people involved.
Thank you. Did you want to come back in?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Super. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so next I've got Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. It's an associated question. Some of the people at the top end of the table will know about the issues we've had in Wetherby over the weekend, and Polly will be aware as well. So when we're looking at future developments of houses, this is probably you, David, are we looking at putting in structures and schemes so that we can actually stop homes flooding from surface water? We know that with the events that we had in Wetherby over the weekend, it would normally be a 1 in 30 year situation. Well, it's only 5 years since we had the last issue, and it was a lot worse this time. So I'm trying to get a meeting together with people to discuss how we can actually move forward. But one of the things that somebody suggested, well, are we actually asking people how they can protect their own homes? And that includes council homes as well as privately owned. So if we're looking at planning for the future, are we actually going to be saying to people and housing developers, you need to actually start looking at some of these situations and see how we can actually safeguard people from having cellars flooded and the water coming in the front doors? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take that one?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. There's a few strands to that, I think, by way of response. I mean, there are two issues, really. One is existing issues and how can they be remedied in terms of existing places, the level of infrastructure, how that might be improved in situ before any new development comes along. So that's a challenge, isn't it, given gaps in infrastructure we know exists. In terms of planning for future growth, we'd rather those issues didn't occur. So we need to make sure that we're planning in the right way, in the right places, to ensure that our new homes and new communities are resilient to climate change and flood risk. And therefore, in our plan making, there are a number of safeguards in trying to future-proof ourselves to avoid these issues happening. One is the preparation of a strategic flood risk assessment for the entire district, and Jonathan Moxon might have mentioned that in his presentation. And we've worked very close with Jonathan and the Environment Agency and others to look at the longer-term flood risk and resilience of the entire district, and where best to plan development and how to plan development within that context. The next part of it is around site assessment. So when we get to the stage of looking at the spatial distribution of growth and allocating land for development against targets, whatever they might be, making sure that there's a thorough and proper site assessment made of individual sites which might be considered. So if there are any particular issues in terms of flooding being one, or other matters such as biodiversity or whatever it might be, those factors are fully taken into account at the outset, and they can be planned for, and they can be site requirements put on the allocations when they go forward through the plan making process. So it's about those sort of checks and balances, making sure that provision is in place and that can be planned for. The final point is around a comprehensive infrastructure delivery plan. One of the things we've done previously with the site allocations plan, Councillor, that you might be familiar with, was an infrastructure delivery plan. And the idea was to try and put between two covers all of the planned infrastructure that we were made aware of, and also to find where the gaps were in terms of new infrastructure which might be needed to support the level of growth that we're planning for. So it's making sure that all of those strands work together. And it's a regrettable situation if people have had their homes flooded, and clearly through future plan making we want to try and minimise and avoid that as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back?
Just to say that that's reassuring, David, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Downs.
Thank you. I think it's also for David. And pardon my ignorance here because I don't really get too involved in planning, but where are we as an authority or as a country with ensuring that new builds are future-proofed for things like solar panels and renewable energy? I ask that because there's a housing development in my ward that was isn't that old, where residents have tried to put solar panels on their roofs only to discover that the weight bearing or there's something about them which means they can't actually put them on.
Thank you, Councillor. That sounds like a retrofitting issue, doesn't it, if there's an existing promise?
Just to clarify, yeah, that was a retrofitting, but really, if we could have foreseen that happening, we could have conditioned it so that it was a position where these houses could have sustainable energy sources and things like that. And I'm just wondering where we're at in ensuring that developers provide that now.
Yeah, I mean, these are important points, aren't they? And I think in Leeds we have sets of policies around sustainable design and construction with the intention that residential development and commercial development is meeting renewable energy requirements, and that premises and properties are future-proofed in terms of meeting energy needs, and that is complementary to wider strategic work that's underway to decarbonise the electricity grid, etc., etc. So we are wanting to work into a position where, you know, we have the strongest possible policies that can be delivered to enable that to happen. It's easier with newer developments because that you're building them from the ground up. Retrofitting remains a challenge, but in terms of new development, it's something that we are factoring in as part and parcel of our site allocations work and as part of our new plan going forward.
Thanks. Also, just referring to the retrofitting, how are we with planning at the moment for people that want to put in things like air source heat pumps and solar panels? How difficult is it for ordinary residents to get permission to do so? Do they need it, etc.?
It depends on what the circumstances are. If buildings are listed or if they're within conservation areas, there may be more restrictions on what people are able to do. There is provision through permitted development to allow for some of this development to take place. We certainly don't want to stand in the way as a service of these improvements being made, but where there are policy issues or amenity considerations to be made, which are picked up through policy issues, then that's something that we would look at carefully and with a view to trying to support such proposals. We certainly don't want to stand in the way of it. It's a question of the specific merits of that individual scheme and where it is and where does that sit within permitted development or if any consent is required.
Thank you. Councillor Stables.
Following on that theme, are we able in our new Leeds local plan to specify that all new builds do have solar panels, air source heat pumps that are truly sustainable?
Well, our policies will be seeking to encourage that. The consultation on the plan is likely to be going ahead over the summer, so that will be an opportunity for people to comment on the specificity of those policies. It's something that we want to see. It will come down to issues in terms of viability and if that's going to be possible in terms of individual schemes, but certainly from the point of view of sustainability, it's something that we want to see as part of all our development proposals.
I'm really pleased that, and I'm not surprised that that's what the direction we're heading and what we want, but I'd like just to know if we are able to, in our local plan, is it something that we're able to do to specify that all new builds, if we wanted to, are 100%, say for example, 100% of them would have solar PV panels? Is it something we're able to do in our local plan?
It's something we're able to do by encouraging that to happen. We can't put a mandatory requirement on specifying that everyone must be. Reason being is that there are other strands beyond planning that are also seeking to deal with carbon reduction, etc., such as the Future Home Standard, building regulations, etc., and planning can't duplicate other regulatory regimes. But from a planning point of view, we will be specifying the highest of standards in terms of encouraging that to happen on every allocation across the district.
I'm just concerned about that because it seems to me, being on planners panels, that viability always comes up and trumps things like that. So, we can encourage as much as we like, but at the end of the day, if the developer says, well, it's not viable on this site, then we can't enforce it. So that would be my concern. So I'm just a bit disappointed that it's not something we're able to do, but I guess if we can't, we can't.
Thank you. Anybody else want to ask a question before I come in with one? Okay. So I was going to ask a question about kind of the use of technology and new developments when we're thinking of construction, but also construction of highways, mending of highways as well. My inbox is often bombarded, as probably lots of people around this table will be, with the latest new thing instead of tarmacking a road, or the latest thing for construction. And I'm sure some of that has to play a part in our journey. So I just wondered where we are as a council in terms of choosing what do we embrace, or where are we making decisions about what things we could and should be doing, because some of them claim to have absolutely enormous effects in terms of reducing the carbon of doing a job such as putting a building up or putting a road together.
Maybe if I just do this one to start, just to give David a bit of a break. Yeah, there was an article I read over the weekend about National Highways had done some work out at York on the A64, where they've used they've reviewed the whole process of resurfacing the road on this agenda, and they're able to do that because of the length of the road involved, the section of carriageway that's being redone, the size of the equipment that's being used, and the amount of material that's coming in. I think it's been a very successful scheme, but there is a very high premium to the scheme as well. So whilst it has benefits in some areas, it has disbenefits in the other. And I think the premium was about 30%, which on a very large scheme is a very significant sum. I think I would just summarise to say that we're keen to explore all opportunities, and certainly in my service there's a live piece of work at the moment looking at some of the minutiae in terms of when we do potholes, can we do it in a different way, a more efficient way, a more low carbon way. And as I say, that's a live piece of work that colleagues are looking at the moment, and hopefully we'll report back later in the year. And to help us as a service, on the slide that you've seen, there's this climate action plan, and this is the younger members of our team pushing us just out of their degrees and pushing us all to make sure that we're looking at things in the round and not just doing the same old, which I think is really important. And we've also taken the opportunity to secure some placements, student placements over the summer holiday from the universities to test us further as well, because this is an important agenda that we have to move on. I hope that just gives you a flavour of sort of the principles and the ethos that we're trying to bring to this important agenda.
It does, yes. I mean, I'm sure it's something that's not an easy one to crack. I would imagine if we look back from 50 years from now, a lot of new technology will be being used and a lot of things will be being done in a different way. But it's hard to strike that balance, isn't it, between moving to something that actually isn't going to be the way, as opposed to getting stuck and using things that really we could be. So yeah, I do appreciate that, and I think it's really good that you've got students involved and younger members of staff pushing the way without trying to upset any of those older members of people around the table. But it's true, isn't it? I would imagine that a lot of the content of the young people coming out of universities, they will have had to have looked at climate as a big part of what they're doing, and so that knowledge, I think, is really important. Okay, about to bring this item to a close unless anybody wants to come in with any last questions, please. Oh, we've got two more now then. Yep, and we'll have Councillor Stables and then Councillor Ray.
Thank you. It was just going back to something that Angela said about, which I was really pleased to hear, that food waste from the markets was going to go for animal feed. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because years ago, certainly when I was at school, all the food waste from schools used to go to animal feed, and I'm just wondering if that is a possibility again now or not.
I would imagine it is a possibility. I would have to check with my colleagues in the resourcing department, where obviously I have catering leads. We would check with the work that we're doing with schools, and I'm also going to look at Polly to see if she knows the answer as well. No, she's shaking her head. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just scribbling that down as an action. Councillor Ray, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think a lot of this does come down to education. I think people are befuddled by the whole offer of how you can save energy and what is false claims. So my parents in the last year have been sold windows that they'll replace the panes and it will save 85% of their energy use. They've also had insulation put in the loft and now has to come out because it's making the roof unsafe. I think people are really sceptical about all this because there are so many people jumping on the bandwagon. I wonder if there is any education that we can do as a council to put information out there so people have got somewhere that they can trust to get the information, rather than having daughters jumping up and down and saying, no, you can't have that work done tomorrow, because that's how fast it is for old people. I spoke to my mum and dad on Sunday, and by Monday they were clearing the living room to get these new windows put in and had handed over a vast amount of money, which I managed to sort out, but not everybody is lucky enough to have someone else to do it. So I think it is about education and trust.
Just going to come in on that one. So the West Yorkshire Combined Authority is actually leading on setting up a one-stop centre that will provide that level of advice and give that sort of safety net in a way in terms of being able to ask those questions, or once people need work, getting some guidance on it. So I think that will be the key sort of focal point for that, so it's not quite there. And I think as part of our forward plan, that's something we see coming back to this committee, but it'll probably be later on in the year.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
So I just wonder if I can come in on that. One of the things that I thought was fantastic was in terms of the reassurance. I'm just coming back in terms of reassurance and of tradespeople, and I'm just wondering whether, like the information that we sent out about accredited waste removal companies, whether we could do a similar thing that was accredited tradespeople in the green sector around these things, to reassure people that these are people you can go to and that those experiences, bad experiences, won't happen.
We're having a joint team meeting with the Wycombe's housing team and our housing team in a week or so, so we'll certainly bring that up and just make sure we understand the full scope of what they're looking at, because I think, like you say, it would be a sensible suggestion. There is things like Trustmark and that are available, but I'll pick that up as part of the discussion.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to come in? Okay. So just to sum up that item, thank you so much for coming along and sharing that information. And it's really good to see that there's a huge amount of work being done, and it's good to see that there are plans for that to continue and to strengthen. So thank you ever so much for sharing that with us. In terms of our actions then, it would be good to look at the food waste from schools as an option. If it's happening from the market, it seems to me that there must be some system in place to do that. So I think that's something that we as a committee need to keep an eye on, because that's a large supply of food waste. I would imagine that we can do something better with it if it's not already happening in schools. I don't know the answer to that, but I would think that that's something that we can keep a close eye on that, and we can bring that to this committee as an item. But if anybody can bring any information to tell us what's currently happening in schools, that would be really helpful. Polly mentioned the one-stop shop coming as a forward plan item, and I think that's something that we can kind of link with the idea of accredited tradespeople, because I think that's been something that has been quite successful, certainly looking at feedback I've had in my ward with the waste accreditation. And then just to pick up finally on the whole thing that we've talked about so many times about education, kind of picking up on Councillor Ray's points about bringing people along on that journey. We've had a workshop on it, we've discussed it several times here at the committee, and we do have some actions following on from that workshop that we'll be actioning over the next year. But it is something that it's always going to be really difficult to get into every home and have if we could beam ourselves into somebody's house and say, this is the work you should be doing, these are the people who should be doing it, trust this, don't trust this. But it is something that we are continuing with, and we will continue to do so. So thank you very much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for attending. And we'll move on to the next item. Okay, thank you. So the next item is item 9, and we've got Stacey. Thank you for your patience, Stacey, coming along to present from Wycombe. Do you have a slideshow for us?
No, I'm just going to talk to the paper if that's okay.
Yep, we've all got the reports, haven't we? Pages 35 in our packs. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. So members will hopefully recall that I attended the committee around 12 months ago now to provide an update on the programme, sort of where we were up to that point in time, along with early work in terms of developing our sustainability strategy for mass transit. So members asked that I returned to provide an update, which is why I'm here today. So this paper that I've submitted seeks to provide an update on mass transit in terms of the programme of activity that we've worked through today, what's in store in terms of programme milestones over the next sort of 12, 18, 24 months. And it also shares the findings of our phase 1 route options consultation, which we undertook between July and September last year, including our approach to placemaking and sustainability strategy and the early sustainability outcomes that we've developed within that context. So as I've already said, a considerable amount of work has already been undertaken on the programme over the last few years. And during the consultation last year, we shared what is our phase 1 proposition, which is 2 mass transit lines, the Leeds line and the Bradford line. So the Leeds line runs north to south across the city from St James's Hospital in the north through Leeds city centre before heading south over the river towards the White Rose. And then the Bradford line, which connects Leeds and Bradford city centre. So I've included at paragraph 1.17 a map which details the route options that we consulted on as part of that consultation. Now, in terms of that consultation, we received around 5,000 responses, which is a really strong level of engagement in terms of the stage that we're at. Other methods of engagement that we've undertaken as an authority, and it's really consistent with other major infrastructure projects of this sort of size and scale. And within that consultation, the findings indicate a really strong support for the route proposals, with over 3/4 of respondents expressing support for the Leeds line and around 2/3 expressing support for the Bradford line. So that's a really good start, but we recognise that it's a long journey and a journey that we need to continue engaging with key stakeholders and communities on. And as we pass through further detailed stages of the scheme development, that consultation and engagement activity will get more and more detailed and likely more and more contentious as well. And we're realistic around that. But what we need to do now is build advocacy for the scheme and to understand from key stakeholders what challenges, concerns and opportunities there are so that we can use that feedback as an opportunity to further develop and improve the scheme. So in terms of approach for sustainability, 70% of people agreed or tended to agree with the approach to sustainability, with a focus on reducing carbon emissions and improving air quality. And in terms of the approach to placemaking, again, over 70% of people agreed that mass transit will improve placemaking opportunities, with respondents highlighting the importance of creating green spaces, improving accessibility, enhancing safety and supporting local businesses along the proposed route. So within the report, I've provided a link to the consultation feedback report, which provides further details on specific elements of the consultation. And in terms of next steps, we're using that feedback from the stage 1 consultation to make decisions on the preferred routes and develop more detailed proposals, including refinements of the sustainability strategy. So over the coming months, we're going to continue to undertake environmental and technical assessments. And as I've said, we're going to continue to engage with key stakeholders before then undertaking a further consultation on what will be our preferred scheme early in 2026. And finally, we're on target to meet the mayoral pledge of spades in the ground in 2028, with the first trams expected to be in operation by 2033. And just to close, I'm happy to take any comments in terms of the report itself or any further questions that members might have on the mass transit scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacey. So I'm going to open up to questions. Councillor Stables?
I just wondered if you're able to tell us anything about the next phases after this phase, please.
Do you mean phases that are not Leeds and Bradford line, so as in beyond phase 1? Yes. Yeah, okay. So you'll hopefully remember that the Mass Transit Vision 2040 set out an ambition to deliver mass transit across West Yorkshire, and that's still an ambition that remains, but obviously we've got to start somewhere and then expand the network from there. So what we're doing in parallel with developing phase 1 as a proposition is also understanding how we can develop future phase activity, so where next. Now, when we took our strategic outline case to the West Yorkshire Combined Authority meeting last year, we also indicated that we were developing a Dewsbury Line development project as an example, which is part of our future phase work. So looking at how in time we can explore opportunities to expand the Leeds line down towards Dewsbury as an example. So we're working closely with Kirklees in terms of scoping out what that Dewsbury line development project looks like, and actually working alongside others such as Wakefield and Calderdale to understand actually where can we go next, and what does that programme of activity look like in terms of future phases. The priority very much remains on Leeds line and Bradford line, because we've got to make the strongest case possible for mass transit in West Yorkshire. But as I said, it is just the start, and we're working on developing future phases alongside that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back?
Thank you. Yeah, and just sorry, another question was, have we definitely got the funding for this, or is it still not in the bag?
Not in the bag. So we've got £200 million development funding from the City Region Sustainability Settlement, or CRSTS as it's known, and that is to develop the phase 1 scheme. So we're absolutely covered in terms of the future, sort of the current programme or activities in terms of developing phase 1, but we recognise that actually that's just the start. So in terms of the cost of phase 1, we're anticipating that phase 1 will cost between £2 and £2.5 billion, and obviously that needs to be funded from somewhere. So what we're doing is developing a business case to submit to the Department for Transport, which will make the case for phase 1 and hopefully ensure that we get some funding from government to deliver that phase 1. But we will also need to seek a local funding contribution as well. So what we're doing in parallel to that is also working out how we can use mechanisms locally to fund mass transit. So thinking about things such as developer contributions, as an example, where housing developments are brought forward as a result or alongside mass transit, and how can we utilise funding from those developments to bring forward related infrastructure to support mass transit. So we have got the funding to take us through to 2027, and then what we'll have to do is bid to unlock further funding opportunities through the business case process.
Thank you. Okay, next on my list is Councillor Downs.
Thank you. More of an observation. Many years ago, I was chairman of Metro and was trying to get trams to West Yorkshire back then. And that was nearly 20 years ago. It has taken that long. The question that Councillor Stay was asked about the funding was always the issue, because we continually had funding cancelled by the government, by various governments. So it's really encouraging that we're getting closer. And I've been away from transport for a while at this sort of macro level. And I know that we're looking at a halt to Leeds Bradford Airport. Is there any consideration of having mass transit to Leeds Bradford Airport? Because I must be the only councillor that represents a ward that has an airport but has no train station or any sort of mass transport focused around an airport. And I've had people say it's quicker to fly into Manchester from America and catch the train to the centre of Leeds than fly into Leeds Bradford Airport and try and catch a bus or whatever into Leeds. So I just wonder whether that's on the agenda at all.
Thank you. So in terms of first part of the question, obviously there's been 2 previous attempts to deliver some form of mass transit in Leeds in the past. So there were Supertram and NGT. And I think you touched on a point there in terms of political cycles and funding cycles, which actually, you know, because it takes so long in the UK to develop major infrastructure projects, quite often the way that political cycles work and funding mechanisms means that by the time that you've got the strongest case possible, things have changed. So actually that same pot of funding is no longer available, or you know, or the goalposts have shifted. And I think that's part of the reason that we're on an accelerated programme for mass transit in recognition of that. But I think what I would say is that because it's a West Yorkshire proposition and it's part of an integrated transport vision, and you know, teamed with deeper devolution and all the support and advocacy that we're getting from government, from local communities, from business community as well, that it really does feel like things are different. And I know that's easy to say when you know you're not involved in the previous schemes, and you can come to it with sort of a fresh, positive set of eyes. But I do think that there's recognition at a national level of how important mass transit is. And you know, the way that we're approaching it is that it's not just a transport intervention, it's an opportunity to really stimulate sustainable, inclusive growth. So actually, as a combined authority, we're in a really good position in that we can bring multiple policy agendas together. So not just thinking about it in a silo as being a transport intervention, actually, how can we work across the combined authority and with district partner authorities like Leeds and other authorities to really deliver the best business case possible, so that it's so difficult to not fund, because actually it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of different ways, and I think we've got a massive once in a lifetime opportunity to really deliver something that's going to positively impact on people's lives and opportunities. In terms of the second option, it plays into what I was saying about an integrated transport vision. So I think there's recognition within the transport portfolio at Wyker, as an example, that yes, we've got an airport that's not currently as best served as it could be in terms of public transport. So that's why it's really important that we deliver an integrated transport offer, so that you know, that we deliver infrastructure, whether it's heavy rail, whether it's mass transit, whether it's an improved bus network through a franchised approach, that means that actually we understand where people want to travel to and from, and we can facilitate that as well. So whilst it's not on the current plans for mass transit now, because we are like I said, we're looking to deliver a West Yorkshire proposition that feeds into bus, you know, accepts that people still will want to use a private car for some vehicles, you know, deliver active travel, so that's the first choice that people make. All those activities will add up to improved accessibility across West Yorkshire. So the airport itself is not on phase one, but it's part of the wider West Yorkshire vision alongside the other enhancements that I've mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, I was involved in both NGT and Supertram, and the difficulty there was that Supertram and NGT both stacked up financially. It was a no-brainer until it came to somebody signing the cheque at the end of the day. We were forced down the route of NGT when Supertram failed, simply because we were told to have a bus-based alternative. It wasn't through choice. We still wanted a tram system. And so I'm fully supportive of what you're doing, and I really hope that eventually a government will listen to the fact that we want mass transit in West Yorkshire. We need it, and it absolutely adds up. Thank you.
And just to come back on that as well, I think what's worth mentioning is the Treasury are looking at reviewing their approach to business case appraisal. So you'll be familiar with the Treasury Green Book approach to business case appraisal. And I think the way that transport schemes are tested through that appraisal process means that sustainable transport propositions don't always score the best in terms of benefits to cost ratio, and that's because it diminishes the benefits that it brings to people or place or health outcomes, as an example. Now that's been changing over time, but the Treasury are going to, they already have announced intentions to review that approach, so that's something that we're tapped into. So through conversations with government, we want to be part of that change to demonstrate how that appraisal system needs to be amended to fully reflect the benefits that a proposition like mass transit can realise.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, I have Councillor Rowntree.
Thanks, Chair. Yep, thank you, Stacey. I don't know if it's perhaps a little too early to be asking this. I'm aware that consultation is an ongoing process and there's more to be done here. But I'm wondering if at this stage you're able to say that whether there's anything that's come out of the engagement so far that's taking you by surprise, tended to make people think, and are we on the right track here? Should we be doing anything differently? Any sort of massive learnings that have emerged?
So in terms of the consultation feedback that we received last year, like I said, much of it was really positive. I think that, part of the sentiment sort of plays back into previous comments around previous iterations and why we're proposing mass transit again when we've not managed to achieve it today, which is to be expected. I think we've got a lot of work still to do in terms of making the case for mass transit, not just in terms of government, but actually to local communities, to businesses, to demonstrate why it's important and how it's going to improve lives as a result, so that communities can really see the benefit. In terms of lessons learned, I think part of it is actually looking at previous schemes like NGT and Supertram and trying to understand why it didn't happen at that point, and it might have been down to politics, but actually there's a lot of lessons learnt as an example in terms of the stakeholder engagement approach and how actually between the formal consultation periods that you still need to keep that drumbeat alive in terms of messaging, getting out, speaking to communities, speaking to schools, speaking to businesses. So we've got an engagement plan in recognition of that to try and build that advocacy for mass transit in between formal consultation. And also it's about using examples from elsewhere as well. So there's other mass transit schemes across the UK and beyond where we can learn lessons about the way that they approach things to try and avoid those mistakes being made here.
Thank you, Stacey. Did you want to come back?
Yes, please, if I could. Yep. Thanks for that. And like Councillor Downs, I'm really keen that this should go forward and succeed this time around. I've been in Leeds a long time myself, and I can remember the previous iterations. And what do you think are the biggest risks to the project? I mean, the Treasury signing the cheques obviously is one of them, but anything else that you like to flag up as you sort of think of the big risks that you are sort of threats to the project as a whole?
Yeah, so I think that is probably the biggest risk, but I would also say as the head of place and consents that getting a consented scheme is also a big risk as well. So we need to apply to government through a transport and works application to gain the necessary consents to deliver and operate the scheme essentially. And a Transport and Works Act process is driven by objectors. So actually, if you find yourself in a situation where you've got lots of very vociferous objectors, then that can take over, that negative sentiment can end up taking over the positive sentiment. So I think that's why the engagement activity is super important, because we need to be able to be clear about what the objectives are and the outcomes of the scheme, so that when faced with objectors, which will be for many different reasons, that we're clear on what we're trying to achieve, and yes, if there is an impact, why there is an impact, and how we're going to seek to mitigate those impacts. So I think that's one of the things that I'm concerned about, but I'm convinced that we've got a way forward. We've got an approach that I think is really robust to be able to get through that process.
Thank you. Did you want to come back? So, at the risk of allowing Councillor Carlisle to jump the queue, was it about this point? Okay.
I thought it might be useful because Stacey might not want to say it herself, but I think one of the most important things for me on this process is that we have some routes identified. Those routes go through a number of wards and a number of different areas, and we're going to be coming back and looking at the plans for how those are most in depth. But I think it would really be beneficial for all members to really get behind those routes as well. I think we could be a risk in the process if we particularly wanted to be, if people are discussing how they go through their areas. Obviously, if we respond to the consultation with all our thoughts so that they can be included in anything that's written up, and that members can support the need for the project for the city and the region as a whole, that would be a great benefit, rather than focusing on particular issues in our area, or making sure everyone's aware of the issues early enough and not bringing them up at the last minute would be useful as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Bromley.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that, Stacey. I remember working around Wheatwood in a strong residential group when the proposal for the tram service being put in around there, and there was a lot of kickback from businesses and residents in terms of how long it would take a disruption to their business, and not a general sense of necessity, really, in particular, because mainly they weren't using a public transport service, and especially not for work. So I think in terms of climate becoming more and more of an understanding of the necessity of why public transport is important around that, it gives a bit more of a weight to our argument. How are we going to manage situations where there is a deliberate pushing of deliberate pushback for an extended length of time in order to create a difficulty and potentially an impossibility around putting this in place?
Thank you. So that's quite a big question. So I guess first of all, in terms of business impacts, there'll be obviously lots of different communities, individuals that will be impacted, whether that's business owners, you know, or we're thinking about impacts during construction as an example. So, you know, we'll develop a construction management plan which will identify what anticipated impacts are going to be and how we can seek to mitigate that. There'll also be compensation schemes as well, or support schemes that we'll develop policies on to try and understand if businesses are impacted, what opportunities there are to, you know, to compensate or mitigate those impacts. So that won't necessarily always be financial in nature, because actually it might be that access is a challenge to a shop as an example. So actually that shop can still operate during construction, but if we make it really difficult for people to access that shop, then it's going to reduce custom. So it could be looking at things like voucher schemes, where we encourage local residents to use that shop with the allocation of vouchers, which is something that's been used in other areas of the country. There's also residential impacts as well. So there'll be property impacts as an example. So again, we're developing a suite of policies to try and understand how we will deal with any either statutory or non-statutory blight. So at the point that we submit a transport and works application, that's what the point that statutory blight kicks in. So we will have to have demonstrated that we've effectively engaged with those impacted parties in advance of that stage, and that's something that we've already started now in understanding who those impacted property owners are, and we're already ongoing with engagement activity. But how can we support people, not just in financial terms, but obviously we know from other major infrastructure projects like HS2, which is quite frequently mentioned, in terms of the health impact that infrastructure projects can have to people, it creates a lot of worry and concern that actually we need to ensure that we've got mechanisms and support in place to make sure that people are supported through that period of uncertainty. In terms of what you were suggesting in terms of campaign groups, I think, you know, it's to be anticipated any form of development will lead to I guess pushback, the potential formation of campaign groups that are anti development or, you know, or seek to oppose the scheme, and that's to be anticipated, I think. So what we're trying to do to sort of get ahead of that is actually we recognise that there's an education that, you know, that we need to bring in terms of information sharing, being clear about what we're trying to achieve, driving behaviour change, the outcomes that we're seeking to deliver in terms of delivering in terms of net zero ambitions as an example, and the whole reason for why we're developing the scheme in the way that we're developing it and in the areas that we're developing it. And I think that's a real important part of the journey, because if we get ahead of that, at the point that we then launch a formal consultation on route options, that even if you've got individuals that don't agree with it in terms of the routes that are taken because there's an individual impact, they at least understand the reasons or the rationale for why you're doing it. And I think playing back to previous comments around the role of elected members, I think elected members have got a real role to play, a significant role to play in terms of helping us as a scheme promoter access residents groups, community groups, business owners and interests, so that we can engage, and we want to engage in what we're trying to do over what we have been doing over the sort of last 12-18 months, and something that we recognise we need to continue to do, is to try and map out a programme or engagement activity where we can reach out to groups, and you know your patch is better than anybody, so a bit of a plea to to share knowledge of any groups that we'd love to come and speak to those groups, to have conversations about what benefits mass transit can bring.
Thank you. Can I come in again, Chair?
You certainly can.
Also, myself and Councillor Dye have been privy to some air quality meetings, and I just wondered if that's part of research as well, and information education that can get out, if there will be some difference between cars being used frequently on a route in comparison to a tram. And also in terms of potholes, everybody loves to talk about potholes. Is there a potential analysis that we could do around the use of the roads, and if it's less frequent by cars, are we then likely to see roads being able to maintain themselves for longer? Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously a key part of mass transit is trying to drive behaviour change, so we're hopeful that through delivery of a mass transit network as part of an integrated transport offer, that people don't feel the need to travel by private car, and will hopefully demonstrate that that's an option. I think in terms of air quality, we're doing an environmental impact assessment as part of our technical work that we're undertaking, and that will include air quality monitoring to understand what the baseline situation is. And obviously some of the routes that we're proposing are on highway, along really congested sections of the highway network, where there'll absolutely be air quality issues. So part of that is understanding what those air quality issues are that exist now, and what improvement mass transit can help deliver as a result of that. In terms of potholes, I think that's a really interesting conversation, and I'm not aware of anything that we're specifically doing in that regard, but I'm happy to take that back into the programme to try and understand whether that is an angle that we're looking to take. But if mass transit's running on highway, and it's a shared section of the highway, then obviously we need to ensure that it's safe to operate mass transit. So there's still conversations to be had in terms of who's going to be responsible for maintenance of sections of that highway, as an example. That's work that we still need to undertake and determine.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Bromley?
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's good to hear about the impact assessment, particularly around air quality, because we had a really interesting meeting, didn't we, Councillor Bromley, with several stakeholders in that. And one of the things that we were looking at was the use of the purple air sensor network. So that's increasing across the city, and hopefully that'll allow you to catch some really useful data that you can use in that. Stop myself there. Thank you. Councillor Harrington, I think, was next on my list.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. My question is it's not about phase one, it's about what you're going to do in the future. So if you think about the map of Leeds, the Bradford side is fine, that's okay, but what interaction is there going to be with North Yorkshire? Because York and North Yorkshire are right on our doorstep. We already do have shared services as far as mental health and health provision are concerned with those two cities. There are bus links, albeit quite inadequate, and York is an absolute nightmare to get to, but it also would mean that people would be able to tie up with the Harrogate and York railway stations if there was some kind of cooperation between those two authorities. Just interested to know what plans would be in place in the future. Maybe it might be phase 3 or phase 4, I don't know, but it's just to flag it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that's why I was sort of trying to highlight the importance of thinking about mass transit in the context of an integrated transport offer, because mass transit won't be the only solution in terms of integrated transport across West Yorkshire and beyond. And I know just last week the mayors of the Yorkshire authorities, including the Mayor of North Yorkshire as well, met to agree a joint approach to looking at transport across boundaries. So I think that's something that's in train at the moment. So no firm reassurances, but I think it's something that I think we'll see over time. And I think reflecting on a recent, so I attended the Interchange conference a couple of weeks ago in Manchester, and obviously Manchester benefits from the B network, which is an integrated transport offer. And I saw all of the mayors in attendance doing sort of opening speeches, and it were really clear in terms of the ambition for the mayors across Yorkshire to work together to make sure that boundaries, political boundaries, don't actually stop people from making the movements, taking the journeys that actually they need to do to live life. So I think we'll see activities related to that in coming months and years.
Thank you. Did you want to come back? Okay. Did I see your hand go up, Councillor Stables?
Thank you. I'm just, excuse me if you've already said this, but are they shared spaces where the tram's going to go in terms of with cars? So is it a separate lane for the trams, or is it a shared space, and how is that worked in a safe way?
Yeah, so I think in order for mass transit to work as efficiently and as effectively as possible, the ideal is that it gets from A to B as quick as possible, or as efficiently as possible. And for that to happen, there's an expectation that it doesn't sit in traffic in the same way as a car or a bus might do, where there's no segregated routes. So what we're doing in terms of developing the mass transit designs is trying to understand if it's at all possible to have segregated running, because that's the optimum position. So segregated running is where you'd have separate lanes for different types of transport. So fully segregated mass transit, a lane for active travel, a lane for cars and buses potentially, or you could have a public transport corridor. So that's something that we're considering as part of our scheme development, where the mass transit route alignment follows a highways alignment. But there are some sections of the mass transit corridors that we're exploring that doesn't assume on highway running. So it might be that there'll be certain sections where we have to share traffic because there's no other options based on land availability. However, there'll be other sections where we could take it offline off an existing highway to get fully segregated running, to get speeds up to mean that the speed of the journey is faster. But ultimately, for mass transit to tempt people out of the private cars, they need to be able to get from A to B as fast and efficiently as possible. And for that to happen, we can't have trams sat in general traffic.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Stables?
I'm just thinking, so presumably you're looking at all the other cities and where it works and how that's done. So, I mean, in Sheffield and in Nottingham, so there are parts that are shared, and I think it's controlled by traffic lights, isn't it? So that the tram can keep running, and the cars have to kind of fit in around the tram. So I presume we'll be looking to do a similar sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. But playing back to what I was saying earlier about the business case appraisal process, what you'll find in that business case appraisal process is that is that where you are introducing traffic control measures which are at the detriment to drivers, then actually there's a penalisation in the business case appraisal. So, you know, that's what I was saying about, I guess, a scheme that promotes or seeks to promote sustainable transport modes doesn't always achieve the best benefits to cost ratio, and that's because of the way that the appraisal system works. So whilst we are trying to ensure segregated running, when you're trying to retrofit a mass transit system into an existing city with existing infrastructure and existing buildings, we obviously need to try and fit in, you know, as best as possible. But we also need to try and minimise the impact on cars, even though we're trying to drive behaviour change, which is why it's a bit counterintuitive in terms of the appraisal process. And I think there's a recognition that you know, things need to change, and we can't just do things the way that we've always done things. So what we're trying to change here, we're trying to drive behaviour change to lead to a more sustainable future where people have the choice to use an effective mass transit system or public transport offer to get to the services that they need. Actually, at the minute, the way that the system works is that most people only have the option to use a private car, or some people, due to poverty, can't even afford a private car. So what we're trying to achieve, we're trying to drive sustainable mode of transport so that people have the opportunity to access jobs, that people have the opportunity to access education. And for that might be at a detriment to a private car, and the business case appraisal process isn't unfortunately set up like that at the minute.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Stables?
Just briefly, just to say, I'm quite surprised actually, because that's the whole point of it. Is you know, if in order to get people onto mass transit, it's got to be more attractive to everybody, and therefore it's going to be to the detriment of drivers, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in a city centre. We want less cars for all the reasons, you know, in terms of less air pollution and road traffic incidents. So I'm just surprised that it's set up like that. Is that likely to change?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying about the forthcoming changes to Treasury Green Book approach to business case appraisal, and us needing to be tapped into that conversation to identify improvements that we think need to be made, because what you'll quite often find, and I'm not a business case expert, you know, I'm a town planner by background, but you know, the understanding that I've got from colleagues on the project is that the way that the system scores sustainable transport schemes at the minute is flawed in comparison to road schemes, as an example. And we need to change that. If we want to drive behaviour change and give people a genuine alternative, then we need to challenge that. So we've indicated that we want to be part of that review so that we can help influence that approach. And playing back about queuing traffic, you know, in order to drive behaviour change, we might accept that actually that's going to lead to a negative impact and that drivers are going to have to queue for a little bit longer. However, that will have negative air quality impacts as well. So part of our assessment process is to try and understand if we accept that there's going to be queuing vehicles, and we're happy to accept that that might be a negative consequence to our business case, well, actually, does it lead to an unintended consequence in terms of air quality because we've got queuing traffic, and how can we seek to overcome that?
Briefly.
No, please come back, that's fine.
It's just to say that, I mean, going forward, clearly there's going to be a move to EVs anyway. So in terms of pollution, by the time the mass transit system's in, there's going to be less polluting cars on the road. There'll be obviously it's a gradual shift to EVs, so that's not going to have such a big impact anyway. So presumably that's all taken into account.
Yeah, so that'll be taken into account in terms of environmental impact assessment. But as you'll know, probably more than me actually, in terms of electric vehicles, there is an air quality issue associated with tyres in terms of particles into atmosphere, but it's not greenhouse gas emissions in the same way as traditionally powered cars are. So all that's factored in terms of environmental impact assessment to understand how future behaviours and technologies in terms of private cars will change over time, and how that can be factored into environmental assessment.
Thank you, Stacey. Are you happy with that answer? Yes. Okay, so I don't have anybody else on my list unless anybody wants to put a hand up now in the last part of this item. Okay, well, I've just got one quick question from me, Stacey. In the next step section, you talked about developing more detailed proposals, and one of the things you said was refining the sustainability strategy. So I wondered what feedback you'd had from the consultation in terms of the sustainability strategy and how that might change.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the question on the sustainability strategy as part of the phase 1 consultation, it was quite at a high level in terms of the question that we asked. So it was more, do you broadly support the sustainability strategy, to which we received a really positive sentiment, rather than, I guess, the details of the sustainability strategy and feedback on that. Now, what we have been doing in terms of developing the sustainability strategy and the associated outcomes or indicators that we're seeking to sign up to as a programme is using, the WICA committee, but also connections into local members as well, to try and understand whether they're the right outcomes that we're seeking to deliver across transport, social, environmental and economic. And also using technical working groups which we've established, which seeks the technical expertise of local authority officers as well in scoping that out. So whilst I can't sort of attribute changes directly to the consultation, what we plan on doing as part of the phase 2 consultation next year is further publicising the sustainability strategy with the work that we're undertaking in terms of those technical working groups to update the outcomes that we're seeking to deliver.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking around for any last minute hands. Okay, in that case, I will bring this item to a close. Stacey, thank you so much for attending. I know we asked you to come back after the last time, and it's been really good that you've been able to do that. I think we will ask you again, because this is an ongoing piece of work, and I think we'd be very happy to put you on our forward plan for next year, if that's okay. In terms of actions for us, I think we can confidently say that you do have our full support in terms of a committee and moving this project on. And you've also asked us to get behind the roots and the consultation, and I'm sure that we're happy to do that as a committee. I think we've got nods around the table saying that, and sharing the knowledge. The appraisal system is an interesting one, and I think perhaps that's something that we can look at as a committee in terms of the fact that I think there has to be some impact on people's private cars, and I agree with the previous comments. There should be, because what we should be encouraging as a committee is getting people onto sustainable methods of transport. So I think that's something that we can look at and see whether we can offer any challenge to that as a committee. We got nods around the table for that as well. Okay, thank you very much. So that's action for you. Please come back again, and 2 actions for us, and we'll take those away. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stacey, for your time, and you are very welcome to go. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to item 10, which is our workshop update. Rachel, did you want to have a first go at that one?
Thank you, Chair. So I know some of you around the room were at our last workshop, which was just at the end of last week, actually. So this time round it was talking about climate and its role within the education sector and how we can sort of look to explore further opportunities within that. So we had a couple of updates from with the chair with her hat on, which was the Climate Commission, Leeds Climate Commission. So at the moment, Leeds Climate Commission are actually looking at a sort of a project in terms of identifying how we can make it easier for schools to liaise with each other and further develop their climate, sort of sit like within the education sector. But as we had Grimsdyke earlier in this session, it's an example to us all as to what can be achieved in the schools. And then we also had Rob from Let's Go Zero, who was representative, came along last minute to represent Let's Go Zero. And he was talking about all the free support and resource that they can offer to schools and interlink with what other departments are doing, as well as the Climate Ambassador Programme as well, which I know we've had Ruth attend this session as well. So it was, again, a really informative, good session. There was a lot of ideas to take away to schools, and it's sort of like a very much an ongoing project and sort of development in that sense. I don't know if you want to add any further, Chair, or because I know you were.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Well, yeah, just to say it is an ongoing project, and I think we've made some good progress really in terms of the work that's happening in schools, and it's something that we're more than happy to bring back to a further workshop if people are interested in picking up on any of the progress. Because if we sit and discuss it in a year's time, I think it'll be very different. I think the landscape across our schools will certainly have improved. One thing that I did want to pick up on, Rachel, was you asked us to come up with case studies for May. Was it for the Wish 5 in month 5? And so that's just a reminder for anybody that was at the workshop or wasn't at the workshop. If you have, thank you. I have had 2 case studies shared with me. But if any of you have any work, like the Grimsdyke work that schools are doing that you think will be really good to showcase, do you want those, Rachel? Yes. That goes to Rachel. Okay, that would be really good. And the only other thing I had from the last workshop was that I shared that list that Rob from Let's Go Zero had of the schools that are yet to sign up to Nature Park, because I think there's a grant of up to £10,000 available, and it just seemed a real shame if there are schools out there that haven't taken advantage of that. And I've had 2 schools come back saying that they will now sign up for that, so that's good news. But I think that's all from me. So questions, comments, Councillor Bromley?
Weren't they schools in particular that were eligible? It wasn't just all schools across Leeds, was it? I think if I remember.
No, it wasn't all schools across Leeds, but out of the schools that were eligible, we were shown a list of schools that have yet to sign up. So if they were on that list, they are definitely eligible, but they haven't signed up yet. Any more questions, comments on that item? So I just wanted to finish by saying, did we agree the Lotherton date? Am I okay to share that? Is that? I don't know. Is that something that we can make public?
I think we've got a potential proposed date in early June that we'll be sharing, dependent on we're just locking in a few details. So the next we'll sort of be returning to. I know a lot of you attended our communications, and which was focusing more on misinformation. So previously, so this time round, the communications and engagement element is looking more positively about some of the work that we've undergone throughout the council. So we're looking at basing it rather than behind screens this time. We're actually going to potentially have it on site. So we can actually, so members can actually experience and see the work and some changes that we've done and messaging that we deliver to the public actually within the environment, rather than just talking about it, sort of see it available.
Fabulous. So I encourage everyone to put that date when it's is it not finalised yet? When it is, you can say. Can we say it? It's all a bit cloak and dagger, isn't it?
So for the 6th of June, it's the morning of the 6th of June. So an invitation will be coming out, but it will state that it's actually in person at Loverton.
Thank you, Rachel. Is that all from you? Super. So I think that will continue our investigation into looking at communication and messaging and all the things that we talk about a lot. So it will be really great to see lots of you along at that event. I'm going to close that item unless anybody has any questions or comments. Okay, so that brings us to the forward plan for the next municipal year. Who's going to lead on that one? Is it Rachel or Polly?
I mean, I wouldn't have said a lot other than to say that we've set out a variety of items. So either where we've had an item already and people have said, actually, we think it's important to come back, or where we've identified things we haven't looked at for a while. So, for example, Yorkshire Water is on there, who didn't come this year. And it's just tried to give sort of a representative samples of all of the key areas of climate change and adaptation. So really it's just an opportunity for people to suggest things that they think are missing, or to say if there's things actually they think you've heard too much on and there's not going to get enough benefit from, to help us shape it. So we will bring it back at the first meeting of the next kind of municipal year to sort of finalise it. So it is sort of a brain dump, primarily for Rachel, to be fair, of everything that's come up and some of the regular items. But yeah, so it's really just that page 49, having a look at that list and seeing if there's anything else you would have liked to have seen that we've missed.
Thank you, Polly. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that list, and out of today's discussions, it would be good to look at the food waste from schools, and maybe we could tack that onto the waste strategy item, or find somewhere for it to go. But is there anything else that has, particularly from you who've been in all the meetings around this table for the last year, is there anything that we've looked at and said we would like to bring back that we haven't yet put on the list, or anything that you particularly would like to see? No, well, in that case, I was just about to say, Rachel, you'd done a fabulous job, but then Councillor Rontree's coming in.
Well, I wouldn't argue with that, Chair. I think Rachel has done a fabulous job. It's a very detailed list. It just occurred to me, I wonder if it would be worth having a separate item on retrofitting of new heating technologies to buildings, or whether that was sufficiently covered in the list that we've got. I don't know what you think there. We do touch on the energy strategies.
Were you wanting to come in on that one, Rachel?
Yes, I think it's something we can explore, but I think we were looking at the wider adaptation session that's mentioned within there, so I was going to sort of encompass things relating to what you've mentioned there, and have a bit of a wider session which focuses on sort of the retrofit, the housing, and then it'll link into also picking up on sort of air quality and things like that. So we're trying to sort of make it so it's more a session that's primarily will be titled adaptation, but it'll include quite a mixture of range of different people speaking at it.
Sure, that sounds fine. Thank you.
Councillor Stables?
I don't know if you've included it in one of these, but is there anything around community energy? As in communities, you know, the idea of sharing best practice would be great, sharing best practice around the city of where we've done any work on any work has been done on community energy.
I suppose it might come up in the area energy plan in terms of that work, or possibly in the climate leads. I don't think there's something specific in terms of community energy. You know, there are community groups that have done energy installations, but not in the sense of running their own community energy scheme. I don't think there is at the minute.
I think you're right there in the there's an awful lot of work that Climate Action Leeds have been doing around community energy, and it might fit in nicely with that session if we ask them to present on the work that their community energy lead has been doing. Councillor Anderson.
Similar type vein, because it's going to be a lot of that work energy-wise is going to be done pan West Yorkshire. Next week you will be approving the WICA's climate plan and environmental plan. Is it worthwhile looking at where their plan and our plan fit together in hand in glove, and where there are differences, so that we can then try and see what do we need to do, and equally what do we need to say back to WICA, you need to sharpen up or change this as a result. An example I would give is franchising of the bus services, because we're told we're going to get it by 27, 28. Well, to be quite honest, some of us won't see any changes till 2030, because the mayor cannot change overnight the bus services. She can't get the level of investment in. So some of our areas will be post 2030 before the major bus changes come online. No matter how, even if the government tomorrow said we'll give you billions of pounds, it's going to take a while. So somebody somewhere in this room is not going to get as quickly as they anticipated the bus service. That's not a criticism. That's just economics means you can't do it all.
Thank you. Polly, were you wanting to come in on that?
I was just going to say that might be quite a good workshop topic, because it's a bit more in depth, isn't it, and working through. So I think that might be a good workshop. Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a fair point looking at the two in tandem.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that'd be a great thing to look at in a workshop. I've got Councillor Stables and.
I was just going to add to that.
Go on then. Do you want to come in then now? Then I'll let you come in now.
One thing we could look at, Barry, to add to that, the council gave quite a forthright response to the combined authority in terms of what their ambitions were for the bus network, not all of which, as you say, I think will be able to be met very quickly. However, I think what we could do is provide some work on behalf of Leeds to be clearer with what we would like to see of our bus network, which would then help the combined authority, when they are ready to make changes, to be more clear about what changes we would like to see. So perhaps that's something where we can assist. Look at that response that was provided to the combined authority for the franchising consultation from the council, and see how we can provide more clarity, more detail on that, in order to then provide that as a recommendation from this group, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Councillor Stables, did you want to come in?
Thank you. I was just thinking about biodiversity across the city, and I'm wondering, do we have a base measure on biodiversity across the city, and is that something that we can measure going forward and report on?
No, I think is the quick answer. So you do the biodiversity measures at kind of a site-by-site basis. So if we were bringing in biodiversity changes, they will do a baseline survey. At development sites, when you do planning applications, they do a baseline survey, but it is very site-by-site specific. I'm sure there's a university research project in there. And you can probably get sort of like this, similar to what we've done on trees, where you get like canopy cover. You could probably get something similar about the different landscapes and things. I'm sure there is probably something you can do. How meaningful it is, maybe it is better in terms of that site to site, and just making sure we're capturing all the different sites that we're working on in one place, so that we can start to see a kind of growing picture. But
I understand how difficult this is, and it is very challenging. It's just, given that we are in a biodiversity emergency, which we've recognised, you know, it seems to me that we ought to have some kind of baseline, and we ought to be looking as a city at setting some targets and trying to measure ourselves against those targets. And maybe it is working with the university in order to do that, but it just seems to me that that's an kind of obvious needed thing to do as a city, as a council, to know, you know, if we declare there is a biodiversity emergency, what are we going to do about it? Well, it's very piecemeal at the moment. So we should understand if what we're doing is actually making impact or not. And the only way to do that is to have some kind of baseline to measure ourselves against and then measure against it.
So I have been having a conversation about whether there's some sort of KPI or something that we can do differently. I don't think we've reached a conclusion on it yet. And the difficulty is, so something like Woodland Canopy, we invested, you know, the university came along, they did all the canopy cover, but actually we can't afford to then redo it. So, you know, and that's the problem, isn't it? That everything like that becomes quite expensive to do. So do you focus on putting money into actually making a difference and making the changes? So it's trying to come up with a measure that's manageable. And I suppose it could be, you could argue that things like the butterfly counts, the bird counts, all of that is measuring biodiversity, isn't it? And how effective it is. So I suppose you want to see that curve start to turn. And all we're doing is trying to provide those habitats and things for that to happen. But it is something that I am aware of. I've had a few discussions about it in the last couple of weeks. So I feel like you've been a fly on the wall.
I think it'd be interesting to look at, can we make use of the data that's already there? You know, that would be a kind of a low cost look at it, rather than having to reinvent something that becomes very expensive.
And next week you're going to approve the biodiversity plan for everybody bar Leeds, because Leeds is going and ploughing its own furrow. So what impact will that have on those wards that border on Bradford or Kirklees or anywhere else? You know, in other words, if in the space of 5-10 yards you've got Leeds has got responsibility for the field there, but the other side of that field would effectively, it's not. I mean, they're not going to be directly affected because it's North Yorkshire, but we already know that in Otley they're going to be under pressure because of housing that's going to be built in the area, because of North Yorkshire coming right up to the border's edge. And I would have thought Wetherby would be exactly the same. So what's going to affect, so in other words, this strategy that's been approved next week, is there going to be any impact that the wards that border on it need to be aware of, and so that they can work together? Because I don't know. I mean, I've not gone into it that much. I've not been briefed to that level of detail on it yet.
The strategy will give like an overarching, won't it? It will give a direction of travel. It won't say this site or that site we're going to do whatever. And whenever a site work happens at a site, there should be local consultation, and that consultation doesn't stop at an artificial boundary. So if we were consulting on a site, we wouldn't not ask the resident on the other side of the road because they happen to be a Wakefield or a North Yorkshire resident, and I would expect the same sort of courtesy in return. So I think I can't see that there will be anything, because we've worked with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, so there will be nothing coming out. It's all kind of under that the nature plan that's been done at a West Yorkshire level.
More money that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
How are you going to spend money? Whether someone would argue.
And it's just going to be working through on a scheme-by-scheme basis, isn't it? And I suppose the stronger our relationships are with our partnering authorities and West Yorkshire Combined Authority, the more likely we are to reach the right outcome rather than be fighting each other. And I think we just need to reach the right outcome for residents and nature.
Thank you. Thank you, Polly. Thank you for comments and suggestions. Any more comments on that item? Okay, thank you very much. So we will return in the new municipal year with this scoped out into an actual kind of plan of action. And moving on, that brings us to the last item, which is date and time of the next year, which is to be confirmed, but penciled in as Monday the 16th of June. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and see you at the next meeting.